What if the only way to save your reputation was to marry the very person who could destroy it? It began on a night soaked in rain and regrets, a kind of night when the city seems to whisper secrets. The ballroom of the Ashburn Hotel glimmered like a golden cage, filled with laughter that didn't reach the eyes. Behind the music and champagne, whispers ran wild. Every guest knew that the host, Jonathan Hale, heir to one of London's oldest banking families, had made a terrible mistake. Just hours earlier, a scandal had erupted. A photograph, grainy but damning, circulated through every whispering circle of the elite. Jonathan was seen leaving the home of a young woman named Evelyn Marsh, an artist's daughter with no fortune, no title, and no right to be anywhere near him. By morning, the Hales' reputation would crumble, unless someone could stop it. Jonathan stood by the ballroom window, watching the storm batter against the glass. His father's words still echoed in his ears. "You've put this family in danger. Fix it, tonight." He turned, and there she was, Evelyn Marsh, standing alone in the doorway, soaked from the rain, her eyes fierce and unflinching. She wasn't supposed to be here. And yet, in that instant, Jonathan understood that fate had already chosen its course. She had come to confront him, to demand that he clear her name before the vultures tore her apart. But the moment their eyes met, the noise of the ballroom faded. There was something defiant in her silence, something that made him realize she was not afraid of scandal, she was afraid of what it would make her become. He crossed the room to her, ignoring the stares. The crowd parted like silk. And then, with a kind of recklessness that only desperation can justify, he whispered the words that would bind them forever. "Marry me." The music stopped. A few guests gasped. Evelyn froze, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fury. "You can't be serious," she said softly, her voice trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what this would mean. But Jonathan was already serious, deadly so. "It's the only way if you become my wife. There's no scandal, there's only us." And that was how the lie began. Within a week, society's rumor mill had spun itself into exhaustion. The headlines shifted from disgrace to celebration. A surprise union. Jonathan Hale marries his muse. The papers called it romantic, impulsive, the mark of a man madly in love. No one suspected the truth that beneath the diamond rings and soft smiles lay a cold arrangement. Jonathan saved his name. Evelyn lost hers. The Hale estate, a sprawling mansion outside the city, became their gilded prison. The corridors echoed with silence. At breakfast they sat across from each other, the porcelain clinking louder than words. He tried to convince himself it was temporary, that once the scandal faded they could quietly part ways. She'd have a settlement, her freedom, and he'd have his life back. But the problem with pretending to be in love is that sometimes you forget it's a performance. It started with the smallest things. Evelyn's laughter, soft, unguarded, when she fed the stray cat that lived in the gardens. The way she played the piano late at night, when she thought no one was listening. How she refused to play the role of a society wife and instead filled the house with sketches and flowers, as if color could heal what money never could. Jonathan found himself listening for her footsteps, waiting for her to speak, hating himself for it. One evening he came home later than usual. The staff had already retired. The fire was low, shadows stretching across the drawing room. Evelyn sat by the window, her hair loose, sketching by candlelight. He stood in the doorway, watching her. She didn't look up. "You shouldn't stare," she said, her voice quiet, almost teasing. He hesitated. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did." She smiled faintly. "You always mean to." That night, for the first time since their wedding, he sat beside her. They spoke not about scandal or reputation, but about childhood memories, regrets, dreams neither dared to chase. The storm outside roared, but inside, something fragile took root. Days turned into weeks. The gossip faded, replaced by stories of the Hale couple's deep affection. Invitations arrived for dinners and galas. They played the part perfectly, hand in hand, smiling for cameras. But behind closed doors, the line between performance and truth blurred. One night, as they prepared to attend a charity ball, Evelyn adjusted Jonathan's cufflinks. Her fingers brushed against his wrist just once, but it was enough to still the world. He looked down, and for the first time she didn't look away. "You don't have to pretend anymore," she whispered. "Who says I'm pretending?" She drew back slightly, searching his face. "You were never meant to love me, Jonathan." He wanted to deny it, to tell her this was all an illusion, but the words caught in his throat, because somewhere along the way, the scandal had stopped mattering. The world's judgment, his family's name, it all seemed small compared to the quiet ache of wanting her to stay. But love born from lies never stays simple. A letter arrived one morning, sealed with red wax, unsigned, inside a single photograph. Evelyn, before the wedding, before the arrangement, standing beside another man, his hand on her waist. The note beneath it read, "Did you really think she married you for nothing?" Jonathan's heart twisted. He confronted her that evening, the photograph trembling in his hand. "Who is he?" She stared at it, eyes widening, then softening into something like sorrow. "You think I lied to you? Tell me the truth." "I have told you nothing but the truth," she said quietly. "But if you don't trust me, then perhaps we've both been pretending." He didn't sleep that night. The house felt colder. Every memory seemed rewritten by doubt. By morning, she was gone. Her clothes still hung in the wardrobe. The piano lid was closed. Only a note on his desk remained. Some things aren't meant to be fixed, Jonathan. Not even the truth. He searched for her for weeks. Every train station, every hotel where she might have stayed. Nothing. Her name vanished from every guest list, every address. It was as if she had never existed. The press began to speculate again. Where is Mrs. Hale? Trouble in paradise. His father demanded silence, but the whispers grew louder. The lie that had once saved him now threatened to destroy him once more. Then, months later, he received a letter with no return address. Inside was a charcoal sketch's own portrait, drawn in Evelyn's unmistakable hand. Beneath it a single line. You married me to protect your name. But I stayed because I saw the man beneath it. He stared at it for hours, the paper trembling between his fingers. He realized then that he didn't just miss her, he needed her. Jonathan sold the city house. He withdrew from the parties, the papers, the endless pretense. The Hale fortune could buy everything except peace. And yet, sometimes, late at night, he swore he could still hear her. The faint melody of her piano, echoing through the empty halls. Years passed, the scandal became legend, then rumor, then silence. But one stormy evening, so like the night they met, the doorbell rang. When Jonathan opened it, the wind howled through the entryway, and standing there, drenched in rain, was Evelyn Marsh. Her eyes held the same fire, the same quiet defiance, but something else too. A tenderness he'd only glimpsed once before. You shouldn't have come, he said, his voice trembling. Neither should you have married me, she replied softly. And yet, here we are. For a long moment, they stood there in the doorway, neither moving. The years between them seemed to vanish. I thought you hated me, he said. I did, she admitted, until I realized I couldn't. The silence stretched, fragile, heavy with everything left unsaid. Outside, thunder rolled. He stepped forward, as if afraid she might disappear again. Why did you come back? Her answer was almost a whisper. Because you once married me to avoid a scandal, and now you can't let me go. Her eyes shimmered with something unreadable, hope, maybe, or heartbreak. And before he could speak, before the truth could unravel, she turned her face slightly away and said, but there's something you never knew, Jonathan. Something I should have told you from the beginning. The wind surged, the door creaked, and in that suspended second, his world teetered again on the edge of revelation. She looked up at him, tears glinting under the lightning flash. It wasn't just your name I was protecting. Then, just as she opened her mouth to speak, the lights went out. The lights died with a sound soft electric fit, final. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the echo of rain and their unsteady breathing. Jonathan's first instinct was to reach for her. His hand brushed against her sleeve, damp and trembling. But before he could speak, Evelyn stepped back. You should light a candle, she whispered, before we say what can't be unsaid. He found one on the mantel, dust covered, half melted, and struck a match. The small flame bloomed between them, flickering against her face. She looked older, somehow haunted, but beautiful in a way that pain sometimes makes people beautiful. What do you mean? It wasn't just my name you were protecting, he asked. Her eyes lowered to the floor. Because the scandal, it wasn't supposed to be yours. He froze. The words didn't make sense. Not yet. You mean? She looked up, meeting his gaze. It was mine, Jonathan. The photograph, the whispers, they were never meant for you. You just happened to be in the wrong place, at the worst possible moment. He stepped closer, the shadows bending around them. Then why didn't you say anything? Why let us go through all of this? Because if I had, she said, her voice breaking, you'd have lost everything anyway. Your family would have disowned you for protecting me. Your father would have buried my name and blamed you. I thought if I said yes, if I married you, I could contain the damage. I thought I could keep you safe. Jonathan stared at her, the candlelight trembling between them. You married me out of pity. No, she whispered. Out of love. I didn't understand yet. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade. The only sound was the faint crackle of wax. Jonathan's mind spiraled backward. Every look, every silence, every half-truth between them suddenly reframed in a crueler, gentler light. She had carried the weight of his salvation and her guilt all this time. He sat down heavily, the candlelight reflecting in his eyes. So all this time I thought I'd trapped you, but you were the one, trying to save me. Evelyn nodded, and I failed. I ran because I couldn't bear to see what we'd both become. The thunder cracked again, shaking the window panes outside. Lightning carved the sky into fractured white lines. Who was the man in the photograph? Jonathan asked quietly. Her expression softened into something he couldn't quite read. His name was Daniel. She hesitated. He was an artist. He was also my brother. Jonathan's breath caught. Your what? No one knew about him. She said he used my mother's name. He'd fallen in with the wrong people, forged paintings for collectors. That night, when you saw me at his flat, he'd been caught. He begged me to leave before the police came, but the photographer caught the moment I turned to help him. The photo looked compromising. Jonathan exhaled slowly, the pieces falling into place like shards of glass finding their pattern. The man in the photograph, the letter, the scandal that had rewritten both their lives. "And your father?" he asked. "Dead," she said. "Years before. Daniel was all I had left." Her voice faltered. "When I married you, I used your name to hide him. Your money paid for his passage to France. That's what I was protecting. That's what I couldn't tell you." Jonathan's throat tightened. The candle between them sputtered, shadows pulling closer. "So you saved him," he said. She shook her head. "No, he died a year later. I received the letter the week I left you." The words hit him like a blow. Evelyn turned away, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "I thought if I disappeared you'd move on. That maybe one of us could live free of the past." Jonathan rose slowly, the silence heavy with ghosts. "But the past doesn't fade, Evelyn. It just hides until it finds its moment to return." For a long time neither spoke. The storm subsided into a gentle drizzle, the candle burning low. Finally, she said, "Why did you stay in this house all these years?" He smiled faintly, tired, wistful, "Because leaving felt like erasing you. And I couldn't bear that." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and something in her eyes broke. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of wet earth through the open window. He walked toward her, each step deliberate, as if crossing the space between who they'd been and who they might still become. "Evelyn," he said softly, "there's nothing left to protect anymore. Not your name, not mine, just us. If there's anything left of that." Her eyes shimmered. "And if there isn't, then let's find out." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The candle went out. Morning came pale and gray. The rain had stopped, leaving the world quiet and washed clean. In the stillness of dawn, Evelyn wandered the garden, the same one she had once filled with sketches and flowers. The statues were cracked, the ivy overgrown, but the air carried a fragile kind of peace. Jonathan watched her from the terrace, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him. She seemed both part of the landscape and apart from a Taya figure caught between memory and forgiveness. When she turned, their eyes met. For a moment they smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it felt like the first true thing between them in years. Later they sat by the piano. Evelyn's fingers traced the keys as if reacquainting themselves with something half remembered. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that we were never meant to be happy only to understand what happiness costs?" Jonathan considered this, his gaze fixed on the window, where sunlight flickered weakly through the clouds. "Maybe," he said, "but I'd rather understand it with you than forget it alone." She pressed a soft chord, the sound lingering like a sigh. "And what if we can't go back?" "Then we don't," he said. "We begin again." That afternoon they opened the shutters that had been closed for years. Dust swirled in the golden light as if the house itself were waking from a long sleep. In the attic they found boxes of old photographs, Jonathan's family portraits, yellowed letters, Evelyn's early sketches. Beneath them, wrapped in linen, was a small painting neither remembered. It was a portrait of Evelyn, unfinished. Her eyes half-rendered, her expression somewhere between fear and hope. Jonathan touched the edge of the canvas. "Did you paint this?" She shook her head. "No, Daniel did. I'd forgotten it even existed." They carried it downstairs, propped it against the wall. For a long time they simply stared. It felt like a message sent from a life interrupted. As the days passed, their silence grew easier. The rhythm of ordinary things, tea, sunlight, the sound of footsteps, stitched itself quietly back into place. Yet beneath it all, something unspoken simmered. One evening, as twilight bled across the fields, Evelyn found Jonathan sitting by the old oak outside the estate. He was holding a letter. "It came today," he said, "from a solicitor in Paris." She frowned. "Paris." He handed it to her. Inside was a short note stamped with an unfamiliar crest, regarding the estate of Daniel Marsh. Certain items belonging to the late Mr. Marsh were recently recovered, including a journal. "You are listed as the sole beneficiary." Her breath caught a journal. Jonathan nodded. "It seems your brother left you something after all." They left for Paris within the week. The journey felt surreal, like traveling through the echoes of their old selves. Evelyn stared out the window as the countryside blurred past, her reflection merging with the passing clouds. Jonathan watched her quietly, wondering if this was what redemption looked like, not forgiveness, but the decision to keep walking beside each other, even through uncertainty. In Paris, they met an aging curator who remembered Daniel. He led them to a small apartment above a forgotten gallery in Montmartre. The room smelled of turpentine and dust. On the table, beneath a sheet of glass, lay a worn leather journal. Evelyn's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were sketches, portraits, city streets, fragments of faces. But between the drawings, notes were written in hurried script, letters addressed to her. "I know what you've done for me, Eve. You've given up your name, your life. But one day, tell him the truth. He deserves that, and you deserve to be loved without shame." Tears slid down her cheeks. She turned another page, and there, pressed between them, was a faded photograph. Not the one that had ruined them, but one taken years before. Her, Daniel, and Jonathan, laughing in the garden of the Hale estate. A day she had forgotten, when everything had still been possible. She looked up at Jonathan. He was already watching her, eyes bright with the same impossible mix of grief and wonder. "He wanted us to find this," Jonathan said quietly. She nodded. "He wanted us to remember. They left the journal in the curator's care but took the photograph with them. That night they walked along the Seine. The city lights shimmered on the water like a trail leading somewhere neither could yet see. "Do you think," Evelyn asked, "we can ever make peace with what we were?" Jonathan took her hand. "Maybe we don't need to. Maybe we just learn to live with it." A boat passed beneath the bridge, its lanterns glowing softly against the current. The air smelled of rain again, but this time it didn't feel like a warning. When they returned to London, the Hale estate no longer felt like a tomb. It was still old, still haunted by their choices, but it was theirs again. Jonathan hung Daniel's unfinished portrait in the main hall. "He never got to finish it," Evelyn said quietly. "Then we will," Jonathan replied. That night, she took up her pencils for the first time in years. Her hand shook as she drew the first line, hesitant, fragile, but then something steady returned. Jonathan watched from the doorway, the faintest smile touching his lips. Hours passed unnoticed. The house breathed again. The night outside deepened, soft and forgiving. When she finally stepped back from the canvas, Jonathan came beside her. The portrait was whole. Not perfect, but alive. "It looks like you," he said. She smiled faintly. "No, it looks like who I was becoming." He turned toward her, the weight of the years between them folding into silence. "Evelyn," he said softly, "there's one thing I still don't understand." She looked at him. "What's that?" He hesitated. "If you hadn't come back that night, if the lights hadn't gone out, what would you have told me?" Her gaze flickered, a quiet storm behind her eyes. "The truth," she said. "That the scandal never really ended, that someone still knows what we buried, and they're not done with us yet." The clock struck midnight. Outside, a single car pulled up to the gate. Headlights swept across the windows, lingering like a question neither of them was ready to answer. The car idled at the gate, engine humming like a low warning beneath the quiet. Its headlights cut through the rain-slicked darkness, spilling across the lawn in two white beams that trembled against the mist. Evelyn and Jonathan stood frozen by the window, neither moving nor speaking. For a long suspended moment, the house felt alive again, listening, waiting. Then, the engine stopped. Jonathan's breath clouded the glass. "Did you tell anyone we were back?" Evelyn shook her head. "No one." The silence that followed pressed against them, thick as the fog outside. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate, of footsteps on gravel. Jonathan turned away from the window, his voice low but steady. "Stay here." He crossed the hall, his reflection fragmenting in the darkened mirrors. The old oak door groaned open. A man stood there, early 40s, raincoat glistening with water, hat tilted low. He didn't look like a stranger. His posture was too familiar, his silence too sure of its place. "Mr. Hale?" the man asked. His accent was clipped, English polished to steel. "Yes," Jonathan said slowly. "Who are you?" The man smiled without warmth. "A friend of your late father's. My name is Finch." At that name, something cold moved through Jonathan. Finch. He remembered it from the old Daisy solicitor who had managed the Hale family's most discreet affairs. The kind of man who lived in the gray between loyalty and leverage. Finch removed his hat, shaking off the rain. "I do apologize for the intrusion. I thought it best to speak in person." Jonathan stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in." As Finch entered, the air seemed to shift. Evelyn appeared at the far end of the corridor, her hand resting on the banister. She watched him like a shadow would watch fire, quietly but ready to move. Finch noticed her instantly. "Ah," he said. "Mrs. Hale, I was hoping you'd be here as well." Her name on his tongue felt like a trespass. "What do you want?" Jonathan asked. Finch smiled thinly, setting a leather briefcase on the table. "Let's call it an old debt that's come due." He unlatched the case with a snap. Inside lay a folder, yellowed and worn. He drew out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table. Jonathan's heart tightened the moment he saw the Silla wax insignia he hadn't seen since his father's funeral. "This," Finch said, "is a document your father instructed me to deliver under specific circumstances. Circumstances which, I'm afraid, have now arrived." Jonathan hesitated before unfolding it. The letter was dated 15 years ago. The handwriting, unmistakable, his father's sharp, deliberate strokes. "To my son, Jonathan," it began. "If you are reading this, then my silence has outlived my strength. You have lived your life believing that scandal was a moment of weakness, a mistake to be buried, but it was never yours to bear alone." Jonathan's eyes moved faster now, scanning lines that unraveled everything he thought he knew. "The woman you married, Devlin Marsh, was never chosen by chance. Her father once worked for me, and what began as loyalty ended in betrayal." He stopped reading. The words blurred. Evelyn took a hesitant step forward. "What does it say?" she asked. He looked at her, unable to form the answer. Finch watched silently, his expression unreadable. "Best you finish it, Mr. Hale." Jonathan's hand shook as he continued. "In 1989, I entrusted Henry Marsh with managing accounts tied to the French investments, funds that could not be traced to the Hale name. When discrepancies arose, I discovered too late that he'd diverted money for his own purposes. He died before the truth came to light, but his children, they inherited the burden. Evelyn never knew the full extent, I suspect, but she carries the legacy of what was taken." The paper slipped from Jonathan's hand. Finch leaned forward. It would appear, Mr. Hale, that your marriage was not simply a coincidence, it was restitution. Evelyn's voice trembled. That's not true, isn't it? Finch said, his tone almost gentle. You thought the scandal was about love, or appearances. But it was about money, property, names. He glanced between them. Your father ensured the Marsh family debt would be repaid, one way or another. Jonathan's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to deny it, to tear the letter to shreds, but something deep inside whispered that it fit, that it explained the strange way his father had accepted the marriage, the silence that had followed. Evelyn's face had gone pale. Jonathan, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't. He turned away, the room closing in around him. The portraits on the wall seemed to watch, stern and unyielding. His father's eyes, painted decades ago, glimmered with unspoken judgment. Finch packed his case with unhurried precision. I'll give you time to consider your position. There are accounts still unresolved, and shall we say individuals interested in seeing this matter concluded. Get out, Jonathan said, his voice low. Finch tipped his hat. Of course, but I'll be in touch. The past, Mr. Hale, doesn't forgive neglect. When the door shut behind him, the silence left behind was unbearable. Jonathan stood motionless, the letter still on the floor. Evelyn knelt, picked it up, and read the words through tears that made the ink run. He's lying, she whispered. Your father's gone. He can't defend himself, and Finchie's always been a vulture. But Jonathan's eyes were distant. What if he's not lying? She flinched. He turned toward her, his voice hollow. What if this us was all arranged before we ever met? What if my father chose you not because of love, but because of debt? Her answer came like a breath of wind. Then maybe the lie became real. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to take her in his arms and erase every word Finch had said. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, the rain beginning again, soft and relentless. The letter lay on the table beside a single glass of untouched whiskey. In the dark, Evelyn appeared at the doorway, barefoot, her shadow long against the wall. You haven't said a word since he left. Jonathan didn't look up. There's nothing to say. She stepped closer. There's everything to say. He turned to her, his eyes red-rimmed but sharp. Tell me the truth. Did you know about my father? No, she said immediately. I didn't, but your father worked for him. Yes, and he stole from him. I didn't know that until tonight. Her voice cracked, but Jonathan's silence was colder than anger. I can't lose you again, she said, her hand trembling as she reached for him. He stood, stepping back. Maybe you already did. The words hung there, heavier than any accusation. Evelyn turned away, her shoulders shaking once, then stilling. You think this was a lie, Jonathan, but it wasn't. Everything after that night, after the rain, after the vows, was real. You can't rewrite that just because someone else did before us. He didn't answer. She left him there, and the house seemed to exhale with her absence. For the next few days, the silence deepened. Finch's shadow lingered, unseen but felt. Letters arrived with no signatures, only small reminders of what had been revealed, bank slips, copies of old ledgers, names Jonathan didn't recognize but knew were meant to haunt him. Evelyn tried to reach him. He drifted through rooms like a ghost. Then, on the fourth evening, he found something strange. In the study, behind a false drawer in his father's desk, lay another envelope, the same seal, but this one bore Evelyn's name. He hesitated before breaking it open. Inside were two items, a small brass key and a note written in his father's hand. If you ever wish to know the truth, go to the Ashburn vault. What was stolen was never money, it was trust. Jonathan stared at the words until they blurred. That night, he showed it to Evelyn. She read it twice, then looked up. Ashburn, the hotel, the night of the scandal, Jonathan said. She nodded slowly. Maybe that's where this all began. He met her gaze. For the first time since Finch's visit, there was something like unity between them again, not forgiveness. Not yet, but a shared hunger to uncover what had been hidden. They left at dawn. The road to London was empty, washed clean by rain. As they drove, the city rose before them like an old secret familiar, but changed. The Ashburn Hotel had aged. Its gold facade dulled, its name half faded on the sign. Inside, dust and silence. The world had moved on, but its ghosts had not. At the front desk, Jonathan presented the key. The clerk, an old man with silver hair, examined it carefully. This isn't a room key, he murmured. It's from the vaults below. They haven't been used in years. The vault was hidden beneath the wine cellar, a corridor lined with old safes, their iron doors sealed with rust. The key fit one of them perfectly. The lock gave with a shuddering click. Inside was a small box. Inside the box, letters, photographs, and a journal. Evelyn recognized the handwriting instantly. Her father's. She opened it slowly, her breath shallow. The first page was addressed to her. Evelyn, if you ever find this, I need you to know that what I took wasn't money. It was proof. Proof that the Hales were laundering funds through the French accounts, hiding political contributions and bribes. I tried to expose it. Your mother begged me to stop when I didn't. They ruined me. If this reaches you, trust no one with the name Hale, not even Jonathan. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Jonathan's face had gone white. "That's not true," he said, his voice shaking. "My father, he wasn't." But the next page was a list. Names, amounts, signatures, his father's among them. For a moment, neither of them breathed. The truth had split itself open, and neither side looked clean. Jonathan sank against the wall, the weight of it crushing. Everything he had built, everything he thought he'd known, his father's honor, his family's legacy, was a lie, and Evelyn's father had died trying to expose it. Evelyn closed the journal, tears running silently down her face. He looked up at her, hollow. "You knew none of this." She shook her head. "I swear I didn't. But now you see your father ruined mine, and mine ruined you." The room was utterly still. "Then," she whispered, "what does that make us?" Jonathan stood slowly, his hand brushing hers. "Not forgiveness, not blame, just exhaustion." "Maybe," he said, "it makes us the only two people left who can tell the truth." She looked at him for a long, trembling moment, then nodded. Outside, the morning light broke through the storm clouds, washing the city in fragile gold. But in the reflection of the glass door as they left, a figure watched them from across the street. Finch, a cigarette glowing between his fingers, and as they stepped into the daylight, he dropped it to the ground, crushing it beneath his shoe, his gaze never leaving them. Whatever truth they thought they'd uncovered was only the beginning. The cigarette ember hissed against the rain-slick pavement, a small red wound fading into darkness. Finch's reflection lingered in the glass door long after Jonathan and Evelyn stepped into the morning light. He didn't follow immediately. He simply watched eye-sharp, calculating, as if he already knew where they would go next. Jonathan and Evelyn walked in silence, the city's hum rising around them. London moved like nothing had changed, yet to them, everything had. Every streetlight felt like an interrogation. Every passing face, a potential threat. Evelyn held the journal close to her chest. "We need to leave," she whispered. "If Finch followed us here, he'll know what we found." Jonathan's voice was low but firm. "Leave, and he wins. He wants us to disappear. That's what my father did to your family. He erased the evidence. I won't repeat his cowardice." She stopped in the middle of the street, her voice trembling. "Jonathan, this isn't just your family's secret anymore. It's ours. And the people behind it, if these names are real, they don't forgive exposure." He turned toward her, the morning light catching the exhaustion etched across his face. Then maybe it's time someone stopped forgiving. For a heartbeat, she saw the man she had married, the fire in his eyes, the quiet defiance that made him dangerous and noble in the same breath. They found refuge in a small cafe near the river, the kind that smelled of burnt coffee and forgotten mornings. Jonathan spread the journal on the table between them. The pages, brittle and smudged, revealed a network of transactions spanning decades, companies, accounts, government officials. The Hole name was buried deep within it, like a vein of rot beneath polished marble. Evelyn traced one entry with her finger. "This date," she said softly. "It's the same week your father arranged our marriage." Jonathan leaned closer. The entry listed a transfer large untraceably, and beside it, a signature F-hold next to it, in a different hand. A note. "Payments settled through Marsh intermediary." Evelyn's breath hitched. "That's my father." The realization hung between them, heavy as a verdict. Jonathan stared at the page, his voice barely audible. "He used your family to launder his bribes. Then, when it went wrong, he made you the scapegoat." Evelyn's eyes filled, not with surprise but a kind of sorrow too deep for tears. "He destroyed us, Jonathan, and the first married his son." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not yet, please." Outside, a car slowed as it passed. Neither noticed, not at first, but the same car circled again, pausing a moment too long at the corner. Evelyn saw it first. Jonathan, he followed her gaze. The driver's window was tinted, but the shape inside was unmistakable. Finch. Jonathan closed the journal, his decision already made. "We can't stay here." They slipped out the back door, cutting through an alley where rainwater pooled between cobblestones. The sound of footsteps followed, steady, deliberate. Evelyn turned. Finch was no longer at the car. "Go," Jonathan said, taking her hand. They ran through narrow lanes that wound like veins through the city's heart, the fog closing around them. The air smelled of rain and metal. Somewhere a bell tolled. They didn't stop until they reached the embankment. The river churned, gray and restless. Jonathan leaned against the railing, breathing hard. "We need to think. He's not alone. He wouldn't risk following us without backup." Evelyn stared at the journal, her knuckles white. "Then let's make it impossible for him to silence us." Jonathan looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "We go public," she said. "All of it. The names, the accounts, everything. If the truth is in the open, there's nothing left to threaten us with." He shook his head. "You don't understand. These people, Finch, my father's associates, they've lived their whole lives burying secrets like this. They'll burn the world before they let it reach daylight. Then we burn with it," she said. Her voice didn't tremble this time. For a moment, he saw the strength that had always terrified him in her, the refusal to be anyone's victim again. They found shelter in a hotel under false names, a small, crumbling place overlooking the Thames. The room smelled of damp linen and dust. Jonathan laid the journal on the desk, staring at it like it might vanish if he blinked. Evelyn opened the curtains. The river's reflection flickered against the glass lights trembling on moving water. Do you ever wonder, she said softly, if this was always meant to happen? If everything our marriage, our loss was just a path to this moment? He didn't answer immediately. I used to think fate was something you inherited, he said finally. Now I think it's something you choose to break. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the air between them shifted again. Something fragile, half-forgiven, lingered there. But then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. They froze. Jonathan's voice was a whisper. Don't open it. The knock came again, louder, impatient. Evelyn moved to the peephole, her breath fogging the glass. No one's there. He crossed the room, looking past her. Empty corridor, no shadows, no sound. He exhaled slowly. They're trying to rattle us. He double-locked the door. Evelyn turned away, pressing her palms to her temples. Jonathan, this can't go on. We can't hide forever. He looked at her, the exhaustion etched deep into his face. We won't. Tomorrow, we go to the press. Someone independent, someone who can't be bought. Evelyn hesitated. And if Finch finds us before then? He glanced at the journal, then at her. Then we make sure he finds nothing. That night, neither of them slept. Evelyn sat by the window, sketching absently in the margin of the journal lines that spiraled into shapes that made no sense until she stopped and stared. It was a face. Finch's outside. Thunder rolled low across the city. The storm had found them again. Sometime before dawn, Jonathan's phone buzzed, an unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the message. If you want to know why your father did what he did, come alone. Ashburn Cemetery, noon, no signature, but he didn't need one. He looked toward Evelyn, asleep at last in the chair. Her hair framed her face, soft and peaceful despite everything. For a moment he thought about waking her, then he didn't. He left the note on the desk, weighted by his wedding ring. The sky was the color of iron when he arrived at Ashburn Cemetery. Rows of marbles stretched into the mist, names half erased by time. The air smelled of rain and earth. Finch stood beneath an oak, umbrella tilted, eyes calm. You came. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I'm done being hunted. Tell me why. Finch gestured toward a nearby headstone and marked, save for a date. Your father asked for that to remain nameless. Do you know who lies there? Jonathan shook his head. Evelyn's mother, Finch said. She died the night before the first scandal broke, not by accident. Jonathan's pulse quickened. What are you saying? I'm saying your father didn't just silence Henry Marsh, Finch said softly. He silenced her, too. She found the documents, your father's ledgers, and threatened to expose him. He couldn't allow that. Jonathan stepped back, the world spinning. You're lying. Finch's gaze didn't waver. Am I? Why do you think your father kept me? Why do you think I was his shadow? I cleaned up the blood, Mr. Hale. That's my business. The words hit him like cold water. The trees swayed, the sound of the river in the distance echoing like a heartbeat. Jonathan's voice cracked. Why tell me now? Because someone has to own what he built, Finch said. And if you don't, others will. There's money still hidden, accounts waiting to be moved. You could walk away rich enough to never look back. Jonathan's stomach turned. You think I'd take what he stole? Finch smiled faintly. You already did. Every day you lived under his name. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops that darkened the earth. Jonathan turned, ready to leave, but Finch's next word stopped him. She doesn't know the worst of it, Finch said quietly. Evelyn, what her father did after her mother's death, the choice he made to survive. Jonathan turned slowly. What choice? Finch's smile widened. Ask her yourself. But be prepared. Truth cuts deeper than lies. Jonathan's fists clenched, but Finch was already walking away, disappearing into the mist. When he returned to the hotel, Evelyn was gone. The journal, to only the sketch remained, Finch's face, half finished, lines trailing off like smoke. Jonathan's heart pounded. He searched the room, the lobby, the street. Nothing. Then, just as he reached the river, his phone buzzed again. A photograph appeared on the screen. Evelyn, standing in the rain beside a familiar grave. Beneath it, a message. She knows. Jonathan froze, the city roaring soundlessly around him. Somewhere thunder cracked like a warning, and the storm finally broke open. The rain came down in sheets, thick and relentless, drumming against the river's edge as Jonathan ran. His breath tore through his chest, sharp and shallow, the photograph still glowing faintly on his phone screen. Evelyn, the cemetery, the same grave Finch had shown him only hours before. He didn't feel the cold or the water soaking through his coat, only the pulse in his throat, the growing roar inside his head that drowned out everything else. By the time he reached Ashburn Cemetery again, dawn was bleeding slowly through the fog. The city behind him seemed to fade into silence. He followed the narrow path between the stones until he saw her, a solitary figure standing before the nameless grave, her coat clinging to her like second skin. She didn't turn when he approached. She didn't have to. You knew, she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but something inside it trembled. You went to him. Jonathan stopped a few paces behind her. Evelyn, listen to me. Don't, she said, almost a whisper. Not this time. You've lied before, maybe not with words, but with silence. You knew there were things your father kept from me. You knew he used us. He took a step closer. I didn't know about your mother, not until Finch told me. At her mother's name she finally turned. Eyes were red, but dry, the kind of exhaustion that comes when tears have nothing left to give. He told me too, she said. He said your father killed her. The words seemed to hang in the air like frost. Jonathan shook his head slowly. It wasn't supposed to be like that. He said it was an accident that she fell, but Finch, his voice cracked. He said he cleaned up the blood. Evelyn's gaze flicked toward the grave, then back to him. You still believe anything that man says? I don't know what to believe anymore. For a long moment, they just stood there. Rain whispered against stone. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled once, hollow and low. Then Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the journal. There's something you haven't seen, she said. She opened to the last pages, ones Jonathan hadn't noticed before, written in a different hand. The ink was darker, sharper. This isn't your father's writing, she said. It's my father's. Jonathan frowned, scanning the lines. The entries were confessions, not of financial crimes, but of something deeper, something moral. I tried to stop her. One entry read, I tried to make her see, but she wouldn't listen. She wanted the truth to come out. I didn't know what else to do. I called him. I made the deal. And when she died, I told myself it was mercy. Jonathan looked up slowly. He called your father. The night she died, Evelyn nodded. Her voice was barely audible. My father made the call that killed her. He traded her life to save ours. It was as if the world had stopped breathing. The rain fell softer now, a fine mist that clung to their faces. Evelyn's hand trembled as she closed the journal. All these years, I blamed your family. I thought I married you out of duty, out of guilt. But the truth is, we're both children of the same lie. Jonathan took a slow step forward. Evelyn, we can still know. She shook her head. We can't fix what was built on blood. You said once you wanted to break fate. Maybe this is how. Her eyes lifted to his, filled with something unreadable. Sorrow. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe both. You can still choose who you become, Jonathan. But you can't save me from who I already am. The wind rose, stirring the trees. Somewhere behind them, a car door slammed. Jonathan turned, scanning the fog. A black sedan had pulled up by the gate. Finch stepped out, his coat drawn tight, an umbrella in one hand. I told you, he said, his voice carrying over the wind. Truth cuts deeper than lies. Evelyn's grip on the journal tightened. What do you want? Finch walked closer, each step deliberate. The book, that's all. Give it to me, and this ends. Jonathan stepped in front of her. You're not taking it. Finch smiled faintly, almost with pity. You still think this is about justice. It's not. It's about control. You expose these names, and the city burns. But if you hand it to me, it disappears like it always does. You both get to walk away. Evelyn's expression hardened. You mean we get to live as ghosts? Finch's eyes flickered with something like regret. Better ghosts than corpses. He took another step. Jonathan moved closer, shielding Evelyn behind him. Finch, Jonathan said, his voice low and steady. My father used you to hide his sins. You've spent your life cleaning up his mess. But this is your chance to stop. Finch's jaw tightened. You don't understand what you're inviting. Maybe not, Jonathan said, but I understand what silence costs. For a moment, everything hung in balance, the three of them standing between graves, the world holding its breath. Then Evelyn spoke softly. You can't bury what's already dead, Mr. Finch. Before he could react, she threw the journal into the air. The wind caught it, scattering pages across the wet grass like pale wings. Finch lunged forward, trying to grab them, but Jonathan stepped into his path. They collided, the struggle violent, clumsy, primal. Mud splashed, hands clawed, and for an instant, the umbrella flew open, black fabric spinning like a wounded bird. Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos. Stop it. Jonathan froze, breathing hard. Finch staggered back, his coat torn, his face pale. The rain soaked them all now, blurring the edges of everything. Finch's voice was quiet, almost fragile. You don't know what you've done. Evelyn met his gaze. No, Mr. Finch, I finally do. He looked at her for a long moment, something breaking in his expression, then turned and walked toward the gate without another word. His car engine roared to life, then faded into the distance, swallowed by the storm. For a while, there was only the sound of rain and the faint rustle of paper. Jonathan knelt, gathering what pages he could. Many were ruined, ink bleeding into water, names dissolving into nothing. Evelyn knelt beside him, her hands trembling. It's over, she whispered. Jonathan looked up at her, water streaming down his face. No, he said softly. It's begun. They left the cemetery as the first light broke through the clouds. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick and still. The city below seemed different now, quieter, heavier, as if it too had heard the truth. Back in the hotel room, Evelyn spread the surviving pages across the bed. Jonathan watched her in silence. Each page was a fragment of a life they no longer recognized, evidence of the world that had shaped them, trapped them, defined them. What will you do? He asked finally. She looked up, eyes distant. What we should have done long ago. He understood. Together they spent the next hours copying, scanning, sending, not to one journalist but to many. To the people who couldn't be bought, who still believed in truth. As the files began to upload, Evelyn sat back and closed her eyes. "He'll come for us," she said quietly. Jonathan nodded. "Let him. We have nothing left to hide." The sun began to rise, pale gold cutting through the gray. Outside, the river shimmered calm again. Evelyn turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think this will make things right?" He hesitated. "No, but maybe it will stop them from being wrong." They sat together in silence as the final bar on the screen turned green. Somewhere across the city, phones began to buzz, inboxes to fill, secrets to crumble. For the first time, Jonathan felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe. He looked at Evelyn. Her face was tired, lined with everything they'd lost, but there was something else there too. Peace, maybe. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. The world was waking up. Evelyn stood, walking to the window. "It's strange," she said softly. "I spent years trying to escape my name. Now I just want it to mean something." Jonathan joined her, the morning light warming his face. "It already does." They didn't speak again for a long time. The city below began to move, unaware that its foundation had just cracked. Somewhere in the distance, Finch watched from his car, eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind moved through the trees, scattering the last fragments of the journal he hadn't been able to catch. He picked up a single page, torn and blurred, and stared at the handwriting. Then, quietly, he folded it and slipped it into his coat. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist. In its light, the graveyard seemed almost peaceful, the nameless stone gleaming pale against the earth. And somewhere between what was lost and what was left, the truth finally began to breathe. The day after the story broke, the city changed its rhythm. Not in a way anyone could see at first glance, but underneath a quiet hum of conversations behind closed doors. The nervous shifting of power, the subtle tremor that ripples through a place when it realizes it has been watched all along. The names from the journal appeared on screens, whispered on airwaves, printed in the morning papers. Faces once untouchable were suddenly visible again, stripped of polish and certainty. The Hale Empire, built on silence, began to unravel one truth at a time. Jonathan and Evelyn watched it unfold from a distance, the glow of the television flickering against the hotel wall. Reporters outside the Hale estate shouted into microphones, their words sharp and urgent. A banner ran beneath the broadcast: Hale Corporation under federal investigation. Neither of them spoke. The world that had defined their lives was dissolving, and all they could do was sit in the slow collapse of its echo. When the phone finally rang, neither of them reached for it. The sound filled the small room like a memory, distant and persistent. Jonathan looked at it, then at Evelyn, who simply shook her head. The call went unanswered. He turned the television off, and for the first time in weeks, there was silence. Outside, sunlight spilled through the window, soft and clean. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed and new. He could see the river from where he sat, moving gently beneath the bridge, the same river that had mirrored every stage of their story, from deceit to confession. Evelyn stood by the window, her reflection ghosted in the glass. "It doesn't feel like victory," she said quietly. Jonathan joined her, watching the slow churn of the water below. "No," he said, "it never does, not when the truth costs this much." She turned toward him. "Do you regret it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, regret belongs to the things you never said. We said everything." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We said too much, maybe." He looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face as it was now tired, worn, but real. The woman he had once married out of fear now stood beside him as the one who had given him courage. He wondered if fate had known it all along, or if they had simply learned to make meaning from their ruin. By midday, the hotel was surrounded by reporters. Voices echoed from the street, questions thrown into the air like stones. "Did you know about the accounts? Did you plan the leak together? Are you afraid?" Evelyn listened, then turned away. "They'll never stop asking," she said. "They will," Jonathan answered softly. "Once they find someone new to chase." He packed the last of their things into a worn leather bag. The journal, now nearly empty of legible words, lay on the bed between them. Evelyn picked it up, running her thumb along its spine. "What do we do with it?" Jonathan thought for a moment, then took it from her gently. "We bury it where it began." That evening, as dusk stretched long shadows across the city, they returned to Ashburn Cemetery one last time. The gates were half open, creaking in the wind. The air smelled of wet earth and grass. The world felt hushed, as if waiting for them to finish what they had started. They stopped by the nameless grave. The ground was still soft from the rain. Evelyn knelt, pressing her hand against the stone. For her, she whispered, for both of them. Jonathan placed the journal at the base of the grave. For a moment, neither of them moved. The book seemed smaller now, almost fragile, as though it had given away everything it had been keeping. Then he covered it with soil until only the corner of its worn cover remained visible, catching the last light of the setting sun. Evelyn looked up at him. "Do you think they'd understand what we did?" Jonathan's answer came slowly. "I think they'd understand why." The sky deepened to amber, and the air grew cooler. Somewhere, The bells of the city began to ring, the kind of sound that makes everything pause. Evelyn closed her eyes, listening. "Maybe this is what freedom sounds like," she said. "Or forgiveness," Jonathan murmured. They walked back through the rows of graves, hand in hand. Each step felt lighter than the one before. For the first time in months, neither of them looked over their shoulder. When they reached the gate, a familiar figure stood by the path. Finch, his coat was gone, replaced by something simpler, and for once his posture wasn't that of a man guarding secrets, it was of someone letting them go. Evelyn stopped, her hand tightening around Jonathan's. "What are you doing here?" Finch nodded toward the grave behind them, making sure it ends. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I'm not here to stop you. I think I was done long before you were." Jonathan studied him, uncertain. "You could still turn us in. You could still protect what's left." Finch smiled faintly. "There's nothing left to protect. The ones who gave the orders are already running. The rest are begging for silence that doesn't exist anymore." Evelyn tilted her head, her tone quiet but steady. "So what will you do now?" He looked toward the horizon. "Disappear, maybe. Start again somewhere that doesn't know my name." Jonathan stepped forward. "Then you've got what we wanted to." Finch looked at him, eyes tired but clear. "Don't mistake peace for escape. Sometimes the hardest part is living after the fire." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your father once told me that truth is a weapon. Maybe he was right. But the older I get, the more I think it's a mirror. You can't hold it without seeing yourself." Then he walked away, his figure dissolving into the fading light until there was nothing left but the sound of gravel underfoot. Evelyn watched him go. "Do you believe him?" Jonathan looked at the horizon, where the sun was slipping into the river's glow. "I believe we've spent our lives looking for mirrors in other people. Maybe now it's time to look in our own." They left the cemetery in silence, the city lights beginning to pulse in the distance. The world felt wider, somehow emptier but honest. Weeks later, the Hale estate was sold. The headlines moved on to other names, other scandals. Evelyn began painting again, something she hadn't done since before their marriage. Her studio overlooked the river, where the morning light poured through like melted glass. Jonathan would often watch her work, the brush strokes slow and deliberate, as if each color was an act of reclaiming something lost. One afternoon, she turned to him and said, "Do you ever think about what our lives might have been if none of it had happened?" He smiled faintly. "All the time, and I think we would have been strangers." He said, "Better lives maybe, but smaller ones." She paused, looking at him for a long moment before returning to her painting. "Then maybe the worst things are what make us real." Jonathan walked to the window. The city stretched beneath him, alive and ordinary again. The world had survived the truth, just as they had, but it was changed, and so were they. That night, as the sun melted into the river, Jonathan stepped outside alone. The air was cool, and the water reflected the last light of the day. He thought of his father, the empire he'd built, the lies he'd buried, the legacy that now lay in pieces. He thought of Evelyn's mother, her courage, her final act that had started everything, and he thought of Evelyn herself, standing in that first moment when she had agreed to marry him, not knowing that everything they would become was already written in the silence between them. He closed his eyes and listened. The city was quiet. Somewhere, a church bell marked the hour. He could almost hear his father's voice, distant and worn. Some truths are too heavy for one life. But Jonathan wasn't afraid anymore. Some truths, he realized, weren't meant to be carried. They were meant to be shared, scattered, like seeds. When he returned upstairs, Evelyn was waiting, her painting finished. It was a river, winding beneath a gray sky, but in its reflection there was light, soft, gold, unbroken. He stood beside her, silent. She didn't explain it, and he didn't ask. Some meanings live best in quiet. They turned off the lights and watched the city glow outside their window. For the first time in years, the distance between them felt whole. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we've done enough?" Jonathan looked at the horizon where night met the last edge of light. "Enough for now," he said. And as the city exhaled below, as the river carried its secrets toward the sea, their stories settled into stillness too, people bound not by scandal but by what they dared to face together. Because sometimes love doesn't begin with choice, it begins with consequence. And sometimes, the only way to keep the past from owning you is to let it speak, and then to walk away before it finishes the sentence. Outside, dawn began again. The light returned, as it always does, unknowing of the darkness it had outlasted. And in that quiet they finally understood. The truth doesn't end things, it frees them.